So I think I want to call this recording discussing rhetorical strategies for combating identity politics. So I think what has gone overlooked by most people, although it's one of the things which is implied by identity politics, is the destruction of meritocracy. And people have noted this. They have said, I've heard it being bandied around, that I think primarily from the author, what was her name? This is so embarrassing that I've forgotten her name. But she wrote a book called something like, oh my word, she's one of the few people who have actually written books about the destruction of meritocracy. I think that was the central pillar of one of her books. So I don't want to take credit for that, but I do think that it's not rhetorically argued enough against the woke. That the problem with what they do, the problem with identity politics, is the disruption of meritocracy. And when you have a disruption of meritocracy, you basically lose the liberal order. You don't have a classically liberal cultural framework anymore. And the loss of that is, I think, everything else is symptomatic of that loss, of that destruction. So I do think that, that it's the best argument to make that human beings need meritocracy in order to mediate relations between each other. It's the loss of meritocracy which leads to the grievance hierarchy of identity politics and treating people as a token of their group. So if you actually want to combat woke identity politics, the best thing to do is to affirm meritocracy and insist on meritocracy and its necessity for having professional cordial relations, for having politeness in society, without which there's no humanitarian baseline. There's no humanism. There's no nothing. And I think it's been I'm just repeating the same point over and over again. This has been overlooked. The defenders of classical liberalism have not been harping on enough about meritocracy and the loss of meritocracy, and because that really brings the ideological argument fastest to the peak. It makes the opposing ideologies and where they clash and how they clash. I think that's fertile ground to have that rhetorical debate and to have that argument about why racialism, and I have argued, I don't know if I'm going to upload these other videos, about how this all started with feminism, because feminism was the first thing to undermine meritocracy and to demand a kind of equality of outcome based on gender proportions of the population or something like that. The biological sex or gender lines were a good enough excuse to disrupt meritocracy. And once that was culturally viable, identity politics had room to grow. And now we have racial identity politics, which I think was given a lifeline, was given the cultural space it needed from feminism. So, and the wonderful thing about arguing for meritocracy is that it argues for non-sexism and non-racialism simultaneously. So you kind of defeat two birds with one stone. if I can mix my metaphors like that. So I think that because you can always lament over the loss of meritocracy, and you can make good universal humanitarian arguments in lamenting the loss of meritocracy and how it's bad for everyone. You know, it's bad for the taxpayer, it's bad for the economy, it's bad for everything. Because, you know, if you have a less vibrant economy, you can't afford your developmental state, which should be developmental at the right level, not enforcing outcomes, but in priming from the supply side of the labor market, spreading the development of skills and opportunities from mostly skills development and perhaps private-public partnerships in developing training programs and things like that are targeted at previously disadvantaged groups or people that are previously disadvantaged. So you'd actually have to have a qualified recipient of such a program. I'm not going to go over the philosophical chicanery that has gone on in order to make it so that just belonging to a group by dint of your racial tone, by your racial skin color, makes you by definition previously disadvantaged. That's ridiculous. You actually have to be previously disadvantaged yourself. Or where all this has come from is that the word previously, because, you know, to be previously disadvantaged but not actively disadvantaged, perhaps that's the distinction which is applied when you use the phrase previously disadvantaged, which has turned out to be an unfortunate phrase, allowing for the government to engage in kind of overt racialism. But you would think that that would be overtly obviated by the non-discrimination clause. In the equality clauses. Because fairness, you know, obviously fairness would require you to be actively disadvantaged, not just previously disadvantaged as a so-called group. And therefore, you inheriting some kind of transitive property from a racialist conception of group identity, you know, is just, to think that a non-racialist constitution could permit that is ridiculous. So the law has really been stretched in South Africa into disgusting racialistic confounding of basic morality and a confounding of basic non-racialism. I guess maybe one of the only things that can console us at this point in history, although it's not much consolation, is that when this started, it started from feminism. Feminism injected this debasement of meritocracy and sort of the destruction of meritocracy really, I think, destroys the level at which that a non-racialist citizenry can reach each other and can find a crossroads to meet each other at. So it really does get us into the kind of the Nazi paradigm of ethnic consciousness. If we don't have that crossroads of meritocracy, we no longer have a secular meeting place. It's really quite scary. So I think this is how far off we've gotten. And so, I mean, Mmusi Maimane, is still someone who believes in the racialist quota. He can't let that go. In fact, that's his calling card, and he's not, he's not enough of a black fascist for the black fascists. So I don't know what he thinks he's doing, making that concession or making that kind of moral compromise, in order to build one South Africa out of racialist policy that he's happy with. You can tell my distaste for Mmusi Maimane. So much wasted years and potential because someone like that got in charge of the DA. But I guess you have to, sometimes you need to go the wrong direction so that you can see it in plain sight and then go the right direction. So maybe it wasn't so wasted. We needed a hollow example of a hollow politician who makes compromises to try and get an ideological edge on appealing to people through appealing to their demons. So, I mean, the hypocrisy of Mmusi Maimane, the moral... I mean, maybe you can't call him a hypocrite because he's just... I would just call him demonic, essentially. A low-brow, racialistic piece of trash. I mean, I really... I don't think you can express enough ire. He must find it very strange because he has enemies on both sides. The black fascists really don't like him because he's just basically a watered down version of what they are, and he can be thrown around as simping to the white population, because he's not willing to cut their throats and to, slay the white supremacist and have more radical rhetoric, which that Mmusi Maimane will have to go further into the black racialist rhetoric. That because of the moral concessions that he has already made, it's a slippery slope. So this is why, Mmusi Maimane is a stupid politician. He's not willing to stand on principle. He's willing to have compromise principles. And he thinks that he's sophisticated enough that he can make those kinds of horse trading dilemmas. He can choose the better way because, he wants to ride a wave of racialist populism, essentially. I wonder what Dan Corder, that white racist, would think about, that anti-white racist. Dan Corder probably loves Mmusi Maimane. I wonder if that's his ideal politician. Or Mmusi Maimane is probably labelled as a DA sellout because he was once in the DA, therefore he must be compromised by white privilege or something like that. He's probably too white adjacent for Dan Corder, who loves nothing but to dredge up statistics from apartheid and contrast them with the living standards of modern black people, as if, like the ANC government has no accountability for service delivery. Somehow, when white people are in control of things, they're a monolith. But when black people are in control of national government, they don't have control over anything. They're still victims. They're still oppressed. That's Dan Corder's position. Oh man, there's so many jokers around. But I guess that's the kind of nihilistic statistical reductionism that you have to be able to do in order to be a white radio presenter in modern day South Africa. To be a disgusting individual like Dan Corder. Yeah, the amount of racialist scum. And then obviously you get just the plethora of black fascists all over the place who are forced into their black fascism now that they have accepted black economic empowerment on principle. If you believe in black economic empowerment on principle, if you believe in being treated as a token of your racial group, I mean, what are you? You're a racialist at that point. So through the law and the law being normalized through this kind of, has created a kind of ethnic consciousness and ethnic morality. So we're all stewing in a disgusting brew of racialism, and no one, Dan Corder isn't going to complain about it. He's just going to complain, well, it hasn't done its work. We need more black economic empowerment. It's amazing how he can make a moral argument and not even look at the pragmatics about how successful black economic empowerment is. And how about Dan Corder reproduce statistics that look at the cost to the nation at the loss of meritocracy? Would he ever care to do that? I don't think so. Would he ever care to do an honest intellectual analysis looking at the other side of the argument from his disgusting racialist opinions? But I mean, that's the kind of populism that you have to plug yourself into to be a modern South African. You have to align yourself with this kind of black ethnic consciousness that prescribes to racialist policies as a necessity for development. Well, I guess as enemies go, these are good enemies to have, because they're all stupid, evil people. If you're going to have political enemies, these are the clowns that you would want. And I guess their only excuse is, well, we're less clownish than Julius Malema. So as clowns go, they're the best of a worst situation. And I'll continue my argument. I think, one of the losses of meritocracy is that you no longer have the means to which to educate and develop yourself, because there's no target for development, because you care too much about disrupting the system, because the system is inherently white supremacist, or inherently it's off base. So it's like you can't trust the market, because what the market is demanding is tinged with some kind of historical sinfulness. And so from the supply side of things, you have to moonlight. You have to dare to be an imposter that was just given their position because of their racial skin tone or their gender. And so they were put in positions that they didn't achieve based on meritocracy, because the meritocratic system has been poo-pooed as being evil. And so somehow their allotment and their achievement is a moral slight against the corrupt system. They have to believe that. So they have to sort of martyr themselves into being imposters, and the ambiguity about whether or not they are an imposter must all be sublimated into attacking the system, doubling down against the corruptness and the evilness of the system, and attacking the ideological scapegoat. So any discomfort that they might feel is a reflection of white supremacy or something like that. That's how the cult assimilates its worldview against being challenged. That's how it keeps on reproducing itself ideologically. It's a tautological, self-affirming Nazi propagandist, project. All of which, and again, I'm just going to repeat the people who I blame for doing this. Dan Corder is this rank of filth, And so is Mmusi Maimane, is also in this same class. I might as well also add the black penuel. The South African YouTuber is also a disgusting racialist. Always making these obtuse observations that are completely obsessed with using racialist metrics and racialist statistics to justify the destruction of meritocracy and the implementation of some alternative, something else. That is a symbol of their advent of their new thing. Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting being in a society that is this infected with cultural revolutionary stains and strands that tendril out into enveloping reality. It's uncomfortable sharing a society with such a large swathe of racialists and having them go undetected by the law. I mean, this has been the other thing, is just the betrayal of the Constitution by the Constitutional Court themselves, of permitting black economic empowerment when it's obviously racialistic and it's obviously anti-non-racialism and anti-meritocracy. This has been the main mechanism through which so-called developmental legislation has facilitated state capture as well, because the moral corruption of the law in permitting anti-racialism, as it's so called, in the form of black economic empowerment, etc., has created state capture and state corruption, has facilitated state corruption. So the moral corruption is the state corruption. And so all these people that complain about state corruption, but they don't complain about the collapse of meritocracy, I mean, you just ask, where are their brains? Are they so disjointed? Penuel the black pen, calling on people like that, they have no cohesive worldview. They have no consistency. It's just cherry-picked observations. It's such a weak form of intellectualism that we have in South Africa. The elite ideology is completely enamored and captured by the racial ethnocentrism, by the ethnic consciousness provided to them by black economic empowerment. It's just such an easy way to steal something from the system, to parasite from the system. And it gives you a false sense of achievement and a false sense of glorification. And these people are too weak not to take it. They're too stupid not to take it. So, again, I live in a state full of racist, bumbling idiots. Racialistic filth. Yeah, so I think those are the best people to complain about, Mmusi Maimane, Dan Corder, and Penuel the Black Pen. Scum of the earth. This is why we sit with a country that's broken, is because these are the supposed people in the middle ground. These are the people who are in the center of politics. And look at how disgusting they are, how morally filthy and stained they are. Essentially all on the side of the moral corruption that facilitates state corruption. And that's the middle of politics. And that's the real problem with politics in South Africa. And I would say that, the DA has not done enough in bringing the fight to these people. It waves goodbye to Mmusi Maimane and waves and says, we wish you the best. which I mean might be clever to do for some reasons, if you want to have a ragtag coalition at some point. But I do think that you have a higher calling to create sharp political lines in the sand. Lines that have not, the lines that I have made in this recording, that need to come out. So that when people cross those lines in the sand, they know that they're going to the dark side. They know that they're dealing with evil people in a cabal of vanity and selfishness, where people who just love all day to envy things that don't belong to them, and then pretend to be jealous that those things were deprived from them. Who translate their envy into jealousy. They say, no, this belongs to us even though we've never had it. Because it was taken from us because of our race, because of history, because of oppression. So it was stolen from us, and it's part of our birthright. So if I want something, I just pretend that it was part of my birthright, and it was deprived of my group. And that's why I don't already have it. It's a really strange way of imagining a better life, through using history and abusing history and lying about history. Because this is the thing that people don't understand, is that oppression might destroy things, but it doesn't create things. The idea that you're going to create more oppression to try to recollect spilt milk, I can go into epistemic injustice as well, which is a stupid concept. The idea that you can somehow be compensated for epistemic injustice. There's no compensation for epistemic injustice. If the truth is gone, it's lost. You can't be compensated and be given something else instead of the truth. It's an error in conception. I'm getting very esoteric and abstract now, but that whole paradigm does have there's literally no point in talking about epistemic injustice. It's literally spilt milk. You're not going to get it back. You can't get it back. And the idea that you can be recompensated for it, what would you even be being compensated for? You wouldn't know. So when does it end? Oh, no one knows. The whole thing is imaginary. Instead, what we were given is a meritocratic system that has a developmental state attached to it to help people that are underdeveloped, to help people that are disadvantaged, even. And instead of working those mechanisms honestly, in a non-racialist fashion and a non-sexist fashion, we get people, now I'm just repeating myself, so I should stop the recording, but it all comes back to the betrayal of the law itself. So, we live in a particularly unconstitutional order at the moment. The law has been racialized, and not enough people recognize that fact. Not enough people are honest about that fact. And so, under that dishonesty, we have all the other things running amok. But people who have just kind of normalized the immorality of the law, I do think that we have them to blame for state capture and state corruption. Belongs to those people. Because that will always be a hallmark of twisting the law. The moral corruption of the law facilitates state corruption. And it will continue to do that, which is why I'm so vehemently against Mmusi Maimane ever getting anywhere close to government. Because corruption will chase after him. Corruption will follow where his hands have been at work. And then he'll have to double down and spiral it around and systematize the blame for it. And say that he needs to do more, that he needs more of these special dispensations. He'll just become another radical, like Van Damme. He will just eventually become a Van Damme, because he's on the slippery slope, and so he's dangerous. He's stupid, immoral, and dangerous. Also that he can appeal to some kind of disgusting racial populism. Also that he can be more racially populistic, more viable in vying for votes from a disgusting electorate. It's all very sad. The state of South Africa.